Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson. I'm an adoptive mom of a vibrant and insightful 20-year-old son, Joey, who is finding his own path toward healing. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. I'm also a certified coach, helping primarily adoptive parents. Joey and I are committed to helping anyone impacted by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. And I'm very happy to say that Joey is co-hosting this episode with me. Hey, Joe, glad you're here.
Hello.
And today's guest is Pete Patton. He's an Indigenous Inuit adoptee from Oregon who was raised by a white family in an environment that was hostile to people of color. He is a therapist who has found some tools along the way that have helped him, like internal family systems, or IFS, plant medicine, and the Indigenous Community. He is creating an organization called Great Spirit Gathering, a community of faith which supports and embodies Native American spirituality. We're so glad to have you here, Pete. Thank you so much for being on Unraveling Adoption.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Well, first, I always like to elevate adoptees' stories. So tell us whatever parts of your adoption story that you'd like us to know.
Well, I'd really like to focus in on being stolen and adopted.
Mm-hmm.
And today I really kind of want to focus on the stolen aspect, okay?
Okay.
And I really want to focus on the collective nature of being stolen because it wasn't just me.
Yeah.
It was the vast majority of Native adoptees, okay? And, I don't mean to demean your experience, Beth, as an adopted mother or my own adoptive mother's experience of motherhood in that way.
Oh, yeah.
But I do want to highlight that what I understand through my own research, that my biological mother was a third-year University of Oregon student. And I've been able to look at the yearbooks that she was there and knew her name because the state of Oregon had allowed me to have my original birth certificate.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's good.
And so she was a third-year U of O student. But what we know and what we're confident about the Oregon culture at that time was that it was extremely racist and anti-Indigenous. And my parents may have played a role in this directly, but it wasn't their fault. Okay. It was them, doing the best they can, knowing what they know, which was there was a KKK sign at the top of one of the buttes in Eugene, Oregon until 1930.
But, oh my gosh.
Until 1929, the state constitution included that you can't be a person of color and live in the state of Oregon for more than 6 months.
What?
Yeah.
I didn't realize
it was
that.
part of the state constitution that got changed simply because they needed people or they needed cheap labor. Okay. Right. So that changed. And in 1929 and then in 1930, the KKK sign was taken down.
Wow.
But there had been a white cross that had been right next to the KKK sign. And there are community myths about that cross being set on fire at times. And that when Black people were coming into town on the train, which went right by the base of that butte, that if it was on fire, they would just keep moving. Okay.
Whoa.
Right. So I was born 36 years after that.
Okay.
And how long are we away from the Civil War? And we're still dealing with everything we're dealing with about Black and brown people, So I was born into that culture. Yeah.
Well, I didn't realize that Oregon was particularly had its own unique stamp of racism. That's really terrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was a very passive way of remaining white, and, to exclude and say, oh, we're not racist. We just don't have Black and brown people, we just don't allow them.
Don't allow them in. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. So when you say stolen, help us understand what you mean.
Well, the U.S. government's official policy and unofficial policy of assimilation. There are several books, 1491, I'm forgetting the author's name, Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass, Ned Blackhawk's book on Indigenous history. Very clearly, Christian missionaries were used or worked in conjunction with the U.S. government, whether boldly or just kind of a passive participant, but agreed that Native Americans were less than. Much like the science of the day proclaimed that Black people were the bottom of the human barrel. And I say that with utter and complete respect. And so there are statements. The book 1491 quotes several of the heads of missions organizations, whether they're Lutheran, Apostolic, whatever they were, saying that it's cheaper to assimilate than to kill.
Oof.
And that's a summary of a direct quote.
Oh yeah.
And so
that's terrible.
So that was a mission school director up in the Inside Peninsula, up in Alaska, where one of the areas that the Inuit people are from. So stolen, the boarding schools, the reports, the names of dead boarding school attendees is now available from the U.S. government because of the work of the Department of Interior under Debbie Haaland.
Wow.
And probably similar documentation is available from the Canadian government because they've done the same kind of research.
Wow.
So stolen, that's what I mean by stolen. Stolen is it was an official policy to demean third-year University of Oregon students into believing that they were less than, they couldn't support. And again, this is outside the experience of being an adopted parent. But also, I can't neglect being able to say, and I feel very, very confident, Beth, that you've done a lot of work around this. So being able to confidently say, yeah, we are where we're at because of a huge amount of stealing.
Yep. I'm totally there with you. And as an adoptive parent, I didn't go into this thinking, oh, let me cause my child a whole bunch of trauma and create a big giant mess. I did it. I thought I was being helpful.
Right.
And honestly, I did it to build a family. I wanted a child.
You're doing what the culture taught you what is right. And their beliefs of this American family savior motive. And it's surface level. It's not really thinking about the mental and emotional and physical effects it will have on the person and the family.
That's right.
It's just to get this picturesque kind of thing going on.
Well stated, Joey. And I really, really want to use the connections I've been able to build with plants. My teacher has taught me, he talks about himself being a guide, and my teachers are the plants. Okay. Right. And so being able to understand and really tapping into Kimmerer's and braiding sweetgrass, her definition of animacy, that whole connection of we're connected to the earth. We're connected to our ancestors, okay? Right? White culture, I can quote an associate of mine who mentioned when we were talking that, when I say this, Beth, with respect to you, but he said, white people don't have culture, especially American white people. You think about the process of immigration and the demeaning of different white folks, whether you were Italian, whether you were Irish, whether you were some different European, when you came to Ellis Island, you were stripped of your identity.
Oh, yeah.
Many people were given new last names and new first names because they're now American. So that stripping had an effect, and so I think to my experience being in China for the Oregon Mental Health Delegation back in 2001 and our interpreter turning to us and saying, we were on our way to the village of Guian, which is a village of 3 million. Okay. All right. Village of 3 million.
Oh my goodness.
Been gone through a massive expansion in the previous 3 to 5 years. But he turned to us and he said, I must apologize. We've just come from Xi'an, which was the beginning of the Silk Highway, which has, 5,000 years of history and is the cornerstone of China, historically. But he turns to us and he goes, I'm sorry, this region only has a history of 500 years. And all of us Americans on the bus bust out laughing, and we're like, what are you talking about? We only got a history of 200 years. Okay. Right?
Yeah.
And this is well before my kind of delving in. And I mean, I knew I was Native American, but it was very, very surfacey at that time. And so wasn't able to say, well, actually, guys, us Native Americans, we've been on the continents of North and South America for 30 to 40,000 years.
Whoa.
There's actually evidence that's developing that's before that. So,
wow.
What I would say now and what I said then are completely different. But just that whole idea of white Americans not having a whole lot of culture. Yeah. I mean, when we think of America, we think of cars, okay? We've been driving around in those or airplanes, more modern technology, which is awesome, okay, right? And having been part of developing that is great, okay? Makes all our lives easier. But that's very, very kind of shallow when you think about Native American history being 30 to 40,000 years old. Yeah. And that culture of animacy and knowing the songs of plants and
the connection with Earth.
The connection with our ancestors.
Yeah.
And the connection with Earth from down to the bottom of Tierra del Fuego all the way to the top of Greenland. Yeah. That's culture. When we say Native American culture or indigenous culture of the Americas, which I think is more accurate. Because we were trading with each other. Yeah. We were existing. We did know the others existed.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating.
It was a takeover. There's many words for that, but they wanted to be the next culture of the world. They didn't want the indigenous to keep going with their beautiful culture of understanding the earth, the spiritual aspects of things. To me, it sucks as a minority. It's just like there's cultures that were destroyed and completely wiped out by people, and it just sucks.
It's sad. Yeah.
When you were growing up, Pete, in your school or community, what was your impression of Indigenous people, and how did you feel being an Indigenous person growing up?
Good question. I grew up in a lot of ways completely clueless. I knew by definition because I'd been told from the earliest times I can remember, that it came up in conversation. Oh yeah, you're Native American, you're Indian.
Okay, so it wasn't a surprise.
Back then they used the term Eskimo, which is now considered derogatory because it's white man's description of a people group and not the people group's description of themselves. So I referred to myself in a derogatory term.
Oh, you would call yourself Eskimo?
Yeah, because I didn't know any better. I felt what I now can define as racism when I was in high school. I felt separate. I felt somewhat outcast.
I totally understand that.
I didn't have anybody walking alongside me saying, hey, you need to really be careful of this thing that you might be feeling. And do you feel this way? Do you feel kind of like when you're talking with people, they're talking around you or in spite of you, or they have a different facial expression when they're talking to you, and then when they're talking to the white friend, it's a different kind of feel dynamic. That's racism,
Yeah.
But you didn't have anyone to tell.
I didn't have anybody to tell me.
How many people of color were at your school?
Few enough to not remember.
Oh, really? Like you could count them on one hand?
They were invisible in a lot of ways.
Oh, okay. Really? Okay. Joey grew up in a white school too, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah. The things you just brought up, I felt every single one of those. Is just like I was clueless to the idea that these people weren't my friends. They were not truly, genuinely kind people. Maybe they were kind, but they weren't genuinely willing to get to know me and stuff.
It was the process of othering.
Exactly, the othering. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Right. So it's not hate. I mean, in most respects, it probably wasn't hate.
Yeah. Definitely.
Although I'm certain that I did experience that at some level. But it was the process of othering, of being less than.
Which stems from hate.
Being seen as one of the 4 or 5 different races.
Well, Pete, how did you connect with other Indigenous people? And when you did, how did that feel? I assume that's a big part of your healing is connecting with other Indigenous people or maybe even other Indigenous adoptees.
Yeah, it's been amazing. I can really only point to the last several years of doing this work. When I originally had the vision, Beth, thank you for mentioning Great Spirit Gathering. I had the vision for that beginning in 2021 and early 2022 and started developing that concept. And then in September of 22, started inviting people to become part of a board of directors, allies. I didn't have anyone in my community that I knew. There was this kind of nebulous organization called the Astoria Indigenous Gathering Circle that I'd heard about and actually really kind of began around the same time I first verbalized about the concept of Great Spirit Gathering. I didn't call it Great Spirit Gathering until probably within the last 12 months as it's developed, but maybe as late as May of 2023. So like just a little bit over a year ago, I began connecting with Native American folk here in Astoria.
Oh, it's been really recently.
Who were part of the Astoria Indigenous Gathering Circle. And I've become very good friends with them. And one of them is a relative of Ned Blackhawk, who is one of the books that I mentioned. She now that person now works for the agency that I work for as the quality improvement director. And then one of those people is Cliff Taylor, who's a published poet. I always really want to mention him out loud because he's got books and is a Ponca pipe carrier. So he's teaching me how to hold and prepare sweat lodge.
Oh, wow.
And so it's been my reintroduction to my own Indigenous heritage has spanned all the way back to late 2019, early 2020, when I talk in the book chapter that I co-authored in the book Altogether Us. I talk about my experience of receiving a portal to my ancestors and meditating and using internal family systems therapy as a gateway to figuring out what that was, because I meditate, as part of my IFS meditation practice and working with my parts. I've received a challenge from one of my teachers who I was a program assistant for a training in Portland at that time. And that teacher challenged me to spend more kind of meditative time with my parts, which I did. And within a month of beginning to do that, I received this portal. It took me 6 months to figure out that it was a portal to my ancestors.
Oh, wow.
But in the book chapter, I share an experience. And again, that chapter is about collective experiences. And in my podcast interview with Tammy Sullenberger, one of my co-authors is in that interview with me and mentions that she's had a very similar experience. So that whole chapter is a collective experience of different experiences people have had. And I've had a number of Native Americans that I'm in relationship now who've read that chapter and have appreciated it in the collective nature that it's written. So, again, my wanting to share my experience of being stolen and adopted is not unique to me.
Yeah.
Just like experiences of people being in boarding schools.
Sure.
I'm guessing that if my behavior had been a little bit more over the top than it was when I was growing up, that I probably would have been given to one of those boarding schools. Or if, as I share in the book chapter, and again, it's about collective experiences, but my own experience at 22 months was that I died. Car train collision.
Yeah, that was terrifying.
So my adopted father, and I won't go into details about him, but that experience has its own horror story. But again, I want to be connecting that and honoring that the horror stories are more than mine.
Yeah.
They're an extreme.
Yes. Yeah. So much pain, so much has happened, so much trauma.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I will definitely include that book that you're in, Altogether Us. The chapter is amazing and beautiful, and it outlines kind of a new list of terms in the IFS world.
The 7 Bs.
Yeah, 7 Bs. We had the Cs. We needed the Bs.
Yeah, we got Cs. Now we got the Bs.
Yeah. Do you want to run through those real quick? Do you have them in your head?
Hold on a sec. I've got the article right here.
This is kind of inspiring me to look into the IFS way of processing things.
Yeah, IFS is really great.
So the title of the chapter is Embodying IFS with Native American Clients. And all 4 of us, Julie Sullivan, Susan McVicker, Greg Paisley, and myself we are Native.
Okay, very good.
So the 7 Bs of Indigenous-inspired IFS are blessing, right to be, belong, become. So there's kind of 3 in there, but it's all one. Humble, belly laugh,
I love that
embodied learning. Doesn't need to start with B in order to be a B. Balance, and ceremony as unburdening.
Aha. I love that. I love the embodiment. It complements well the C's that I know so well, but I can see the Native American connection to the earth and to the body and to the wider community through those 7 B's. It's beautiful. Well, we'll make sure and link that book into the show notes.
Thank you.
And the other podcast that you mentioned as well, I'll put that in there if people want to find out more, because that's more about IFS. It goes a little bit deeper, I think, with your other colleague about IFS. And I'll include some IFS resources and the Braiding Sweetgrass and the 1491 book. Pete, is there anything else you'd like to say that we haven't asked you about? Or Joey, do you have any other questions?
Just to help better understand your stories. So when 2019, I think I heard you say, was like when you began the true search for your culture, I guess, and your understanding of yourself, or was it before that?
It's been throughout.
Okay.
I consider at 22 months that I died. I was revived right after the accident occurred. Okay. There was a doctor that drove up just as it was happening and found me and revived me.
Jeez.
And so I consider that my shamanic death.
Got it.
Wow.
Experience. I've always kind of loosely viewed that as a very, very defining. It was a traumatic experience. It was it was my first memory. I remember seeing movement, and then everything went black. I was in a coma for 2 weeks until they took a blood clot out from behind my eye. And I had been right-handed. Now I'm left-handed. My brain had to rewire. I'd been learning from a very young age to talk and had an extensive vocabulary. Of course, that's my adopted mother reporting. So, she's got her level of pride for me. And so that comes with some semblance of acceptance as an adopted mother. But apparently I'd walked at 7 months. I had to relearn to walk. I had to relearn to use my hands, and became a left-hander as a result of that.
Wow.
And so I've always kind of seen that as, whether I've defined that, because I grew up in the Christian faith and was very devout when I was in college and all the way until I was 42 years old, and then I really kind of had an experience where I kind of decided that I'd outgrown that and that really wasn't for me anymore. It took me 42 years to kind of come to terms with that. And then I started reading about shamanism and about witchcraft and about other forms of spirituality that had been othered by the mainstream culture, which was very much Christian. And so my process has been a process.
Yes.
And has begun from very early.
Yeah.
So I think the roots of my identity spring back to my ancestors, which I've become very aware of since 2020, but have always been there.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That understanding of that. I asked a question of yourself, but you brought it all the way back to maybe not yourself. It's the ancestor before you or before them. It's this understanding that you are growing through this plane.
Yeah. Well, and I'll be totally honest with you. The Native American culture of today can be quite othering of people like myself and Joey. It took some relationship building. I didn't drop into the Astoria Indigenous Gathering Circle and say, hey, I'm starting up this church.
Yeah.
Because I knew and respect the perspective of Native Americans is, really? You're Native?
Because you didn't grow up.
Right. That othering has an impact of othering others.
They probably don't trust you at first.
Yeah, right. And it's a distrust that's well earned.
Of course.
From the statements we've talked about from missionaries, their roles, as well as the U.S. government's annihilation of the buffalo population, millions and millions of buffalo. My friends down in Nebraska right now doing Sundance, and that land used to be covered.
Really?
Like the sea with buffalo.
Wow. Yeah, there's been so much.
We can pull out a not too long list of what exists now, comparatively.
Wow.
Yeah.
The population is recovering of buffalo, but it's never going to be what it was.
Yeah. And that's just one little piece of it, right?
Yeah. And they were purposely killing because they knew enough about animacy and the concept of our connection to the earth.
To use that against.
They knew enough about it to say, we've got to break that in order to break them.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot.
And that's terrible. That's another aspect of stolen.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's so many layers.
Let's take this kid out of this third-year U of O student's grasp, and we'll shame her until she makes the right decision,
quote unquote.
and then we'll bake this kid or these children.
Yeah.
Because let's be completely honest, adoption was an extension of the boarding schools.
Yeah.
Adoption of Native children was an extension of the boarding schools.
Yeah. Just one at a time instead of a whole bunch of kids at once. Well, that's intense. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing your life with us and your insights.
Yes, thank you.
It's very important for us to hear, especially white people. We need to listen to people like you that are telling us the truth. And I'm soaking it all in, and I'm trying to learn. I will continue doing my reading and listening.
Honor and respect, Beth Syverson.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. If people want to get a hold of you, Pete, how would they do that?
You've got my email.
Okay.
Is endorphindolphin@gmail.com. Professionally, I'm Pete Patton, licensed clinical social worker, worked in the field of trauma for the last 30 years, been trained by Dick Schwartz in the IFS, and I'm doing a level 3 next month with him, and that's incredibly awesome.
Yeah. Well, you're a fascinating person, Pete. I really am glad that we intersected, and I will continue to keep track with what you're doing. I hope we can stay connected. And Joey, do you have any last words?
I just want to say thank you, Pete. Your story and your knowledge is great and very helpful for me. This was kind of a lesson for me, just to understand the Indigenous culture in a very summarized. I could get into it better, like on my own, research it, but it was eye-opening. Very eye-opening to understand what you were saying.
And just to summarize, my purpose and my goal today was to share the collective experience, not just of Joey and mine, and really separating it out from individuals who adopted us, like Beth, like my adopted parents, with all the stuff that they had going on. I want to separate that out from the stolen aspect of things.
Sure.
And understand the suffering that comes from being stolen and being separated and being othered and being completely separated and divorced from our ancestors.
Yes, absolutely.
And in that reconnection, that's where I found truth and meaning.
That's
beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. We're all learning and listening. So thank you so much, Pete.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
And I'm so glad you were here for the conversation too, Joy. Great to have you on. Now, listeners, I want to make sure you know about some upcoming events. If you're listening to this right when that podcast came out, there are 2 events coming right up. August 25th, 2024, there's a medicine circle for adoptees only. It's being led by Miyok Ikaro, who is a plant medicine specialist, and she will just be doing an integration session with those adoptees who have already experienced plant medicine or breath work or any other sort of transformational therapeutic process. That's on Sunday the 25th. And on Monday the 26th, we're going to have a big book launch event for our brand new book, Adoption and Suicidality. You'll be able to meet several of the authors, and there will be giveaways, and we'll have some readings from the book and a chance for anyone to ask questions of the authors. And we just want to start building this conversation around suicidality. We think it's so important. Check out all of our events that are happening anytime on our website, unravelingadoption.com/events. Thank you all for listening. Pete, Joey, and I want you all to stay safe.